All right, welcome to Ready, Set, Engage, episode 5. The quick disclaimer, the views expressed here represent mine and mine alone and do not reflect that of my employer or any organization I'm affiliated with. I had a couple of topics I wanted to talk through today. And so the number of things I have is actually very light. I wanted to talk a little bit about the inherent strength of deflection within a triangle. The vulnerability of the human body, which kind of relates, and then we'll get into expressions of that. NRA and the Yeti, which is kind of a fun little dilemma or conflict that's going on there. And then based on what we talked through on the NRA and the Yeti, I might actually talk about a little bit about, I guess, the Tupperware dynamic and how Tupperware created a model that still applies today in sales and sort of the psychology of influence. So the strength of a triangle, right? The strength of a triangle comes from this natural form, which is sort of an angle, right? And so when you're talking about the strength of it, the strength actually doesn't come from hitting it at a perpendicular angle. Instead, the strength of a triangle comes from the deflection that it has as you pass over that body, right? And so if you're at 90 degrees and something impacts at a perpendicular or flat angle, then all of that pressure and all of that force has to be absorbed in that spot, okay? So now you're sort of playing against the strength. However, if you hit at an angle, then you get sort of this diffusion of force and then this redirection, right? And so you actually pull out some of the force or energy behind whatever that movement is. So you'll see a lot of times when you're shooting guns, you're shooting into a hill or whatever. When you look at the structure of a house, the structure of a house is set so that it doesn't have a bunch of standing water, which then adds weight and causes sort of that perpendicular force to the structure of the roof. And so this idea of angles being stronger at an angle or an edge being stronger at an angle than if you were to hit something straight on is sort of this premise that winds up showing itself in a lot of fight dynamics, believe it or not. So there was this, I've mentioned Jordan Peterson a couple times. I'll probably continue to mention him. He has a book, and it's like the 12 something of life. And chapter 6, I don't know what's all in the book. You don't have to buy it. I haven't bought it yet. But chapter 6 talks about standing straight up, right? And this dynamic of standing straight up and presenting yourself forward, okay? And he says, or his position is, that one of the reasons that that's so powerful is because you're showing your vulnerability, right? The human body doesn't really have much to protect you in the stomach. If you take a direct impact right here, it can stop your heart. Your face is fairly vulnerable, especially just the cartilage areas here, the inherent risk of your eyes, right? And then you've got the downstairs area, which is, of course, incredibly vulnerable. And so when you talk about most of your martial arts and fighting styles, the way that they do that is they actually twist your body, right? And now you are breaking this plane where otherwise you would engage with your most vulnerable, and you're allowing deflection of hits, blows, and kicks off of your body. So it's almost universal, I want to say, in martial arts, that you'll turn a little bit and orient yourself, right? And then the next thing that you'll see in martial arts is you wind up protecting the soft tissues, okay? And so your arms don't have much that you can die from it getting impacted. I mean, if you lose an arm, then you might bleed out, but that'll take you a while. So your arms have rigid structure. They have bones, and they don't have a lot of rich internal organs. So in a lot of fighting styles, you'll pull your arms up, right? So you've broke that plane of engagement. You've shifted your body. And then you brought rigid structures up to protect your vulnerable parts, your face and arms, as it were. And so it's kind of fascinating just to see that play out and see why you're doing those things, why you're bringing up rigid structures to protect your soft innards. But what's more interesting, at least to me, is sort of the psychology that comes back into play when you talk about taunting and you talk about the fight or flight reflex, right? Tying back into some of the things we've talked about. So engagement would be this thing, hey, we're opening up and we're going to engage the world around us, or engage in conversation and show sort of our pride, right? So if you're walking around the office and you're upright and your chest is here, then your presence is, hey, I'm confident and I'm willing to engage. If you start to slouch over, well, what are you actually doing? One, you might think you're expending less energy, but you're actually bringing this down and you're starting to protect your sort of innards right here, right? It's harder to come at you from these angles. And so when you're sad, you're actually bringing this down. You're getting in a smaller form factor, and thus you're actually sort of protecting yourself more than if you were to open up and be vulnerable. Additionally, when you talk about that dynamic, you talk about where does that show up, or you could go to where does that show up, right? Where have we seen that before? Well, if you rewind about, shoot, I don't know when Triple H or Triple whatever was big in wrestling, but he had this really famous move where he would take and he would sort of open up broad stance, right? And he'd do this and sort of put his most vulnerable parts out. And that was his taunt to other people, right? Basically, he was demonstrating his vulnerability and saying, I don't think that you're strong enough to overcome my vulnerability. And thus, this is me exuding power, showing you my power, right? If you want to take it from a movie front, you could talk about Braveheart, right? There's this very funny scene in Braveheart where they're all lined up and they start cheering, and then one guy walks out and he kind of flips up his kilt, and everyone then does that, right? And so most vulnerable part is now exposed, and they're showing their face forward, engaging with their enemy like, ha, you can't do anything. You don't have any power over me, right? Even some of the best fighters in the modern era, if you look at Anderson Silva, in the UFC, he'll take, and when he's taunting somebody, he'll open up and he'll kind of bob and weave and dance around, right? Which is basically saying, I'm too agile. You can't actually engage me. And why that's interesting is because when somebody actually like taunts you, well, you're already in that conflict. You're already in a fight or flight sort of zone. And now you have opportunity. So not only are you in that fight or flight zone, but your body picks up and says, hey, I know that right now I can attack. Right. And so a lot of those wind up being very good at drawing people into the strength, where otherwise they might play more coy, or they might test out your defenses and their ability to aggress on you. So I thought it was really fascinating. One, that he talked about it just from a psychology standpoint and how it allows you to improve your confidence and improve and engage with the world around you. It's also interesting just from that deflection principle, right, of what you're actually doing when you twist and orient your body different. But then it winds up showing up in pop culture, right? This idea that by opening yourself up, you're sort of taunting or prompting an engagement. Thought that was fun. Yesterday I talked a little bit about Fight Club. And how it was an inversion of the sort of popular fable of you go through adversity and you come out on the other end, and now you've transcended your magical. You won the entire war because I don't know, you got a ring or you slayed the dragon or whatever. And Fight Club kind of flips that, because the struggle is going on the entire time. The good and evil is going on the entire time. And then at the end, he awakens and he's not any better. He's actually in miserable shape. But at least he's whole. He doesn't have that same struggle. What I didn't bring up was the engagement idea, right? So there's this very cool scene in Fight Club. I think it's very cool, where Ed Norton and Brad Pitt are in the same screen at the same time, right? They're sort of progressing through this narrative. And I don't remember what the question is. Brad Pitt asks him some question like, what do you know about pain or something? And then he kisses Ed Norton's hand and then puts lye on it, right? And lye is a base chemically, and so it induces a chemical burn. Like basically it pulls the lipids and the fats up from your skin. So he's experiencing this chemical burn. And Ed Norton's response is that fight or flight, right? It's very emotive. I need to get the hell out of here. Like, holy crap, this hurts. And he tries to run from it. Brad Pitt holds him and he says, no, stay with it. Stay with it. And he throws everything out, and he's like, no, stop trying to go to your safe spot and get out of here. stay in this moment and feel this and enjoy the pain, right? Or something along that line. And the premise is that he's engaging and he's sort of being tested by fire, right? He's becoming a stronger man. And this is sort of maybe a turning point in the movie where he actually starts to progress and figure out, hey, I need to figure out who Tyler Durden really is. And then winds up finding out that life is sort of not meaningless, but meaningful. It's just never that duality of good and evil. So I thought it was a really cool visualization of sort of the premise that I've been trying to get through in these, and that premise being, hey, engage to understand, don't engage to win, and don't drive towards that polarization. Instead, kind of get in the moment and have that conversation. I put the evolution of the endoskeleton, but that's sort of ranty, so we'll skip over that one. If you've been reading the news today, and I'm sure it's been all over Facebook, I've seen it from sort of both sides, the mainstream media is starting to pick up and carry the Yeti side, and the NRA and conservative media are carrying the NRA side. And so you've got this polarization of premise, right? Yeti says, well, we made a change to our policies and we let them know ahead of time, and they didn't do it. They should have started with the NRA. The NRA is like, they stopped supporting us, and thus they don't support. It's actually very funny. It's not funny, it's tragic, but they were like, they don't support the Second Amendment, and a lot of the money that was donated or gained from supporting Yeti through the NRA was donated to kids, and so they don't care about the kids anymore. And it's like, it's fascinating and a weird level of extrapolation. And from a psychology of persuasion, it makes sense, right? If you can align yourself to good and show that you're somehow aligned to good, then people want to go towards the good. And Yeti's response went something like, no, here's the policy. So they started out in their, I should link the things. So Yeti's policy was, hey, no, this is the change that we made. We alerted them early and gave them the opportunity to participate in this new vision that we have. Oh, remove preview. And then one of the first things they say in the second paragraph is actually something along the lines of, whatever the NRA said is patently false. I can't find it. I should have wrote it down. But so it's this very funny argument, right? Because you're starting to get this stratification, or this these two opposing sides, and it's now this battle that's going on. But if you read at the end, it's basically Yeti being like, well, no, we're more holy and more supportive of the Constitution and the Second Amendment than the NRA. And the NRA is like, well, we support the Second Amendment, and because they don't support us, they don't support it. And so they're like telling these narratives when you get to the bottom of what's happening, like Yeti made a policy change. They informed the NRA. The NRA didn't take action. The NRA's narrative went from those facts into, oh, they don't support us, and thus they don't support all these things, including the little kids. Yeti's response is, well, that's a really weird parallel to draw, because we didn't say any of that. In fact, like, we support the outdoors, we engage in it, and we would love to continue doing so, right? And so it's just it's a very sort of easy paradigm to draw between the two, because I don't think everyone's somewhat involved, and I don't think anyone would be like, oh, well, that view's completely opposite than mine. I don't think you can make that argument even completely opposite from mine, and that view is completely opposite from yours, and so we have to fight, right? It's sort of one of those ones where they're all like, yeah, we sort of support the same stuff, except for the kids, obviously not the kids, right? But they sort of support the same stuff. So it's just fascinating to see it play out. I was actually trying to find the official statements from the NRA, and the first page of stuff was all news articles and like Snopes and all these liberal organizations trying to badmouth the NRA, and I'm like, why would theirs not be front and center? But it's what people are reading is the long and short of it. And so just an interesting view of that duality of outcome that people seek. Like, their goals are just antithetical, when realistically they probably have a lot more overlap if they get to either a superordinate goal, vision, or ideal. And so how that actually plays out is very interesting. And I was thinking about, talking about, I don't know what the actual stuff is. It's Nina, or you could go to leggings, which is LuLaRoe, or you could go to, God, I know way too many of these things now. Tom's, which is shoes, or even Tupperware, right? Like you rewind all the way back and do Tupperware. So Tupperware was this phenomenon that came out in like the 80s or the 90s, and basically it went viral, right? And everybody had Tupperware. Everybody bought Tupperware. Everybody had a bajillion damn lids, and they had only 5 bowls left because they lost all of them, or however that played out. And every time your friends came around or hosted a Tupperware party, people would buy more. And why would they buy more? Well, they would buy more for a number of reasons. One is sort of that like me principle, right? You tend to gravitate to or spend more time with people that you enjoy being around. So your friend has this thing, you're going to naturally give them the time of day because you like that person, right? You have an affinity to that person. So instead of some unknown salesman that's trying to be all sleazy and sell you something and let me give you a great deal, instead it's your friend saying, hey, I'm just selling the shit, right? So the first is sort of the principle of you gravitate to people you like, you build relationships, and so those relationships serve as the paradigm for how to engage. The second part of that, right, is this idea of reciprocity. And so this idea of reciprocity is that when you would show up to the Tupperware parties, they wouldn't start with giving you Tupperware, or they wouldn't start with selling Tupperware. Instead, they would start with games, and they would start with food and snacks and discussion, right? And they're building up this amount of small things that they've given or bestowed on you. They do little drawings, they give away a couple things, and all of a sudden now they've given you something. And so the sort of social implication is you'll give them something back, or you'll buy something such that your debt is paid, right? And then the last sort of thing that winds up playing out a little bit more regularly in some of the more modern things that I mentioned are things like Tom's shoes, right? So these are, I don't think they're very cheap shoes. Very simple in design. And basically they say every time you buy one of these pairs of shoes, we give shoes to, I think it's like a child in Africa or a village in Africa, right? And so by doing these shoes, you are now associated with this good. And because you're associated with this good, you should feel good about yourself, right? You're doing a great thing by buying these shoes. And so you pay a bunch of money for shoes, and then like a couple dollars out of the back end probably trickles to get shoes for somebody else. So there is good there, but the efficiency of how much good you're doing by buying that pair of shoes is probably a lot less than the story you're able to tell yourself based off of that purchase. Unfortunately, not good, not bad, just sort of breaking it down. And so there's this new thing called Nina. If you're in the market for a purse, clutch, palms, I didn't even know what a palm was. If you're in the market for any of those things, then look up Nina, and I'm sure there will be a million bajillion people selling it and using these same sort of structures, right? That I'm going to befriend you and give you a little bit of free stuff, and then you'll feel like buying a little bit more. And then they sort of like throw the kitchen sink, because they also do you're contributing to the lifestyles and livelihood of well-paying work for people in, I think it's Guatemala, I think. And so it's not that that's not a truth. It's just the degree of scale that applies on, right? And so, so it's sort of fascinating to see it play out. And I might know somebody who has a number of clutches, and I'm like, they do the same thing, right? They like hold your stuff. They're like a clutch, a mini purse. I don't even know how to define them, right? But she's got a number of them, and they kind of look a little bit different. But I'm like, here, watch. This is my wallet, and I think I don't know how long I've had this wallet. It's probably about 10 years, right? And so these are my cards slipping out the back. The thing that holds my pictures doesn't really hang in there very well. It's kind of It looks like a rat tore on it in a couple places, but it still functions, right? And so I only need one wallet. I don't like stock up 3 wallets, you know. And so it's interesting because sometimes we justify or we engage with stuff that we might have not engaged with if we understood sort of the principles or the premises that go on. And I hope I didn't spoil the magic. Like, I'm probably going to get beat up later, just throwing it out there in a good way. But so it's interesting to see that play out, right? So you're trying to tell this story of a greater good and your involvement in a greater good. And you're also trying to do another thing from the, I think the book is from the 80s called The Psychology of Persuasion or something like that. But one of the other principles they talk about is that advertisement is starting more and more to move away from this celebrity is doing this thing and thus you should. What studies show is actually if it's a normal looking person, then you're more likely to say, oh, if a normal looking person is doing that thing, then it seems reasonable that I would do that thing too. And so it's that like me principle or premise without actually befriending somebody. I don't know why it just got so bright in here, but and now it's dark again, whatever. So yeah, I think those were the things that I wanted to talk about today, and it doesn't look like too many comments or anything going on, which is fine. And it's great. Like nobody should be expected to comment. It just sort of adds to the dialogue and the ability to assess what's going on. So I think those are the topics I wanted to talk about today that I wanted to engage on. And in a couple of so 2 days ago was the, hey, please go out and sort of hack the Facebook like system such that you are providing a serotonin reward or like a reward response for people for showing happiness, right? Go out and look for friends that are smiling, engaging in life, happy about some accomplishment that they did, happy about something their kids did, and just give it that real subtle like, right? Such that you're driving up sort of their reward response for doing stuff and focusing on stuff that is positive. The one yesterday was something like, oh, think of one thing you can stop doing today, like one thing you're begrudging about, but really like the outcome doesn't help you at all. So if you can stop doing one thing, try it. And then those all sort of lead to the engage premise, right? My Maddie was running around the backyard today, and I came out and said, hey, what are you doing? And so she came inside, and she's distraught because Daddy like raised his voice just to figure out where she was at. And I said, hey, don't go out the gate. She was playing with the gate. I'm like, don't leave the backyard. You're not supposed to leave the backyard. You don't leave the backyard unless an adult's with you because it's dangerous. And so she started crying, and I pulled her back in and said, hey, come here, and tried to tease out and have a dialogue with her. And of course, when you're crying and sort of afraid because Daddy raised his voice and grumbled because he's a grumpy old ass, then it gets a little bit hard to have those conversations, right? But I didn't let her leave that conversation. Instead, I made her engage and be in that moment. I didn't want to reward her running away. And it wasn't about fighting at that point. It was just about engaging and moving to an outcome to which she, one, stopped crying, and two, engaged again with me, right? And so we sat there for a while, and I tried asking her questions, and she didn't want to talk about it. She didn't want to talk about why she was upset. Thanks for the love. She didn't want to talk about why she was upset. She still sort of cried when I talked to her, tried to tease it out or ask her questions. And then she would calm down for a while. And there's this idea in, I think it's either in the psychology of hypnosis or in neurolinguistic programming, but it's known as pacing, right? And so if you start controlling your breath, and people can see and interact with you and you're in rapport, they'll actually start doing the same thing with their breath. And so I took a while to control my breath. She started controlling hers. And then and instead of engaging more in the thing that was making her emotional, I led her to an outcome that was, one, more logical, and two, allowed her to talk about something she liked. So it wasn't necessarily she went away angry. Instead, we got to some sort of common ground where we could talk about. So we talked about My Little Ponies and Tokidokis, which are like both little unicorns with cutie marks. And I don't know why I know this, all right? I don't know why I know about cutie marks and who has what cutie mark and what their names are. It's almost embarrassing. But I was able to talk to her about that and ask her about a couple and which one was her favorite, and which one was their favorite of the other one, and then how were they alike. And so I engaged her logical side, her left brain, and she was no longer upset. There was no longer emotionality because she had to consider what I was saying and then analyze what was going on. And so she after maybe 30 seconds of talking about the different little ponies and Tokidokis, which are like unicorns, like goth unicorns or something. It's really, it's odd. But after talking about those a little bit and sort of saying, oh, which one's this, and being playful, oh, I think this one is, I don't remember, Bubble Shy or Flutter, I don't know, Fluttershy, Bubble Dash, Rainbow Dash. Anyway, so I brought him over, got it wrong, so she got to correct me, right? And so we sort of equated out this power dynamic, but very much to engage her in conversation. So it probably only took 30 seconds to a minute of having a conversation about something that she enjoyed, and all of a sudden she was cured. She didn't have any more sniffles. She didn't have any more tears running down her face. She was back engaged, and she's like, "Yes, so silly, Daddy." And then we started playing with other toys, and so I might have played with 15 toys in 2 minutes, asking her about them, playing with the names, and making her recognize that, and being like, "Oh, you're very good at the names of all these toys." And she's like, "Yeah, I am," you know. And it became fun and it became engaging. But at the same time, it was engaging. I didn't let her escape, and I didn't let her fight me off or start getting upset and screaming. Instead, it was a, hey, we're here. I'm here until you get into a better state. So you can't run with it. We need to get to that better outcome, whether that's from talking about what's at hand or talking about something where we can agree or find common ground such that we can now progress forward. And so it was fun to see it play out. It's an example of how this makes sense and can actually work in the real world. I don't even know what that is anymore. But so it was a fun experiential hypothesis to just sort of play with, right? Not a right or wrong, not a I win, you lose, but instead sort of a, hey, let's just engage and get past this. So yeah, that's my rant for today. That's episode 5 of Ready, Set, Engage. Thanks for coming back. I love the engagement, and would love to hear your guys' thoughts, what you would love to see discussed, considered, talked about, engaged on, and have a good one.